Who is Rick Levine really? We've seen him decoding the stars on YouTube, breaking down transits in every astrology channel, teaching at every major conference around the world, arguing passionately with other astrologers, writing columns, recording daily horoscopes, playing music under the same sky he studies. We've seen him seek the unseen, chasing cosmic truth through science, myth, and magic. Yes, we've seen Rick Levine pretty much everywhere, but we've never seen him behind the scenes. And today, for the first time, Rick Levine shares his personal journey, his fears, his biggest challenges, and he gets real. Also, he will share with us his own natal chart explained by himself. Here, the astrologer becomes the story. So grab your favorite drink and stay with us. Welcome to Backstage Astrology, where we take off the expert mask and get real. My name is Mayra. I'm an astrology enthusiast and also a creative advisor. I've been helping astrologers with their digital stuff for a few years, and the more I get to see them behind the scenes, the more I realize that also our astrologers go through a lot of big challenges. They have big fears, big insecurities. I always wonder what it was to be an astrologer, how their lives look like really behind all the cosmic wisdom. I always had this question of like, how is your life really? And also obviously if you can make a living out of astrology. So in this new series, I'm trying to talk to astrologers and to really understand what goes on with their lives behind the scenes, all the challenges they have faced as astrologers before and actually, because obviously before, maybe if you would tell someone you were an astrologer, they will label you in a certain or specific way. This is a story that I keep hearing from them. The point of this new series, I want to talk about their doubts, their fears, their breakthroughs, all the behind the scenes moments, obviously their personal lives if they are willing to share. This is the goal of this podcast, is to create genuine connections with astrologers as human beings, to get to know them better. And I hope you enjoy this series. Let's see how many astrologers I can get here. And if you're an astrologer and you have a story you want to share with others, please just send me an email. I will leave all the details below. We're going to talk about the personal struggles. And in the second part, we kind of dive into the transits and insights they are passionate about, the ones that they fear the most, the ones that they find most inspiring. Let's see how this goes. And if you really like these conversations, please like the video, help me a little bit with the algorithm to get the message across. And obviously I know this is for a very specific niche. I'm guessing you're here because you love astrology and you admire astrologers as well. And of course, let's get real. Let's get real with the astrologers. Let's try to uncover what happens behind the scenes. So thank you for being here, and I really hope you enjoy each episode. And just in case you need a hand with your digital stuff, either your website or just your social media or any visuals, I am also a digital designer. I know astrology as well because I'm studying astrology. My dream really is to help astrologers shine out in the digital jungle today. So if you need a hand with that, please visit my website, astrocreativa.com. All the details are below. I'm really passionate about it. I really want them to shine, like seriously. So if you need a hand with anything digital, just send me an email or just visit my website and you can see a little bit of my work. Hopefully you will find it inspiring. I have a sun in Aquarius. I have a Virgo moon, Taurus rising. I also have Jupiter in Aquarius, Mercury in Aquarius, Saturn in Scorpio. I guess this is why I like the backstage kind of astrology. So everything is there. If you need a hand, please, I will be very happy to help you. My name is Mayra. Welcome to Backstage Astrology, and let's get real. Welcome back to another Backstage Astrology episode. And today I'm thrilled to be with Master Astrologer Rick Levine. Rick, how are you? Thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, I am happy to be here with you. I've been looking forward to this. for two reasons. Number one, ever since we met at the conference in London, I've been looking forward to this. And number two, I've been looking for a way to unveil my T-shirt that says my line, think cosmically, act locally, with someone who added a great line to it that says, even when Mercury is retro. And I think you know who that is, because this says a gift from Astro Creativa.
Yeah, Astro Creativa. Yeah, thank you so much
.com. So thank you for the gift. And so I'm happy to be here for both reasons.
Thank you so much, Rick. For me, it's such a pleasure, an honor, and basically a dream come true that you're here with us, not only to share this space with all of us, but also to talk about your personal story. You know, we always hear you talking astrology and transits and quincunx, whatever. And now we want to know who is Rick Levine really, what happens behind the scenes. So there are some basic questions I ask, like five top, but the first, Rick, how would you like people to know you really?
That's a good one. Um, you know, um, it's not really something I think about. I mean, I like people to know me, or at least that portion that I present. I do like to remind people who don't know me that I make up words and I make up terms.
Right.
And one of the terms that I've made up is a hyperfunctional ascendant. And as you know, your listeners might know, our ascendant is kind of our interface point from the inner to the outer. Some people say it's how others see us, but in Vedic astrology, we're reminded that it's not just how the inside gets out, it's also how the outside gets in. It's a two-way street. And I have a Gemini ascendant or Gemini rising, and I have a kind of a crazy Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars conjunction in mid Aries that's sextile, that's a flowing cooperative aspect to the ascendant from the 11th house down to the ascendant. And then I have Pluto that's sextile the ascendant from below the ascendant from the third house. So my Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars are trine Pluto with the ascendant right at the middle point.
Right.
And on top of that, exactly, and I say exactly opposite my Aries stellium, is Neptune in Libra. That's also at the same degree as my ascendant. So I have Neptune in Libra trining my ascendant. Now, what this means is I have Neptune trining my ascendant, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto all sextiling my ascendant, which means that when I'm in a situation where I have to be clever or interactive, people get a part of me that is not really me. I mean, it is, but it's kind of like the veneer. And it's a hyperfunctional ascendant, meaning that it hides a lot of the other stuff in my chart. And most particularly, that would be my Cancer moon, which is a very different flavor. And yeah, and the right response to someone saying I have a Cancer moon, the right response is, "Ah."
Sorry.
And I have to say that what I do know about myself is that if I didn't have a Cancer moon, I'd be a real asshole.
Why? Actually,
because I'd be a jerk, because I have Sun and Mars conjunct in Aries, trine Pluto, with a who cares what anyone thinks, with Uranus rising in Gemini. I mean, I'd be a bit of a jerk, which I can be on occasion, but my Cancer moon really is, in fact, caring and kind. And so it makes me, it gives me something that I think works for me. And so how would I want people to know me? Interactive, present, and kind, you know?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Actually, I have to put your chart to understand. I'm probably gonna can I share your chart like in one of,
Absolutely. Yeah,
so you guys can
it's in the
follow?
public domain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting chart. Obviously, I have questions about your chart, but that's for like the second part because you
Okay.
have a very interesting chart. But I want to just go back a little bit, and maybe you can tell us who were you before Rick Merlin Levine, the astrologer? What were you doing? What were your dreams?
I grew up in, first of all, I was born in the Bronx, New York City. And I grew up. I won the what I like to call the geographical lottery. I grew up in a small town, well, then a small town, about almost 200 miles north of New York City, in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains, a town called Saratoga Springs that a lot of people know as a resort town, a summer vacation place. It's the home of the New York City Ballet and the Philadelphia Philharmonic. They summer there. There's a racetrack, a performing arts center. And before the white folks got there, it was the sacred meeting ground for the Five Nation and later Six Nation Iroquois Indians, the Native Americans that were maybe one of the most sophisticated tribes because they had a super tribe made up of all the local tribes in the area that kind of worked in like council. And it was a matriarchy. And it was actually largely after the Iroquois nation structure that Benjamin Franklin kind of constructed the American Constitution. So Saratoga was a cool place to grow up. So I grew up in a small town. Uh, I was very good academically, but I never studied what I was supposed to. And so even though I got really good grades, I was always the one the teachers would say, this person would do really well if they tried. Now, I tried, but not at the things I was supposed to, which some people would say is still true in my life. I was very blessed, though, because I had a really good education and a good music education. I began playing violin when I was in second grade, and trombone in third grade, all the way up through high school marching band and high school orchestra on the violin. I took piano lessons, so I read and write and know music, which I think has been one of the most important influences in my astrological work because I spend so much of my energy, we'll come back to this later, in understanding the music of the spheres and the harmonies and the harmonics. And that really all comes from my belief that everything is vibrational and musical. And so that's an important part of my early life. And also, I grew up in a Jewish family that wasn't very religious. Matter of fact, wasn't religious at all. But in my hometown, the only local community center, the synagogue, was an Orthodox synagogue. So I grew up reading and writing Hebrew and being bar mitzvahed, and so I grew up, in that learning environment. Which, although when I was 14, I disavowed my Judaism, being a rebellious 14-year-old. I basically said that I can't believe in a God who would just pick some ragamuffin tribe in the desert and say everyone else sucked. Now, I know it's not quite that way, but that was my logic then. And I actually have to say, I share a birthday, not birth year, but a solar degree with Ram Dass. Um, and I first had the privilege of seeing Ram Dass when I was about 18 or 19 years old. And through the years, I'd seen him many times when on a weekend retreat. I mean, when he was still very active. And I have to say that one of my favorite lines is that when Ram Dass, who was brought up in a Jewish family with a father who was a very wealthy Jewish attorney in Boston, and when asked if he was Jewish, Ram Dass replied, "Only on my parents' side."
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So, and so for me, the Jewish piece is certainly an important part of my heritage, but I do not consider myself affiliated with any singular religion. In fact, I like to think of myself as a Robin Hood figure, and that is I'll steal from, I'll steal from the intellectually and spiritually wealthy and give to anyone who wants it, kind of a thing. So,
Nice.
and all religions have, some, well, religions have commonality with other religions, that some people, call, kind of like the, the cosmic philosophy or the universal, philosophy. But on top of that, all religions have a dual nature, and
Mhm.
one is the teaching and or the mysticism that exists behind the religion, and the other is the propagation of the institution, which
Mhm.
has nothing to do with the religion. And of course, living in Israel, I'm sure that you can understand that one pretty well.
Yeah, it's a complicated living style here, but everyone in the end is walking their own truths. I mean, yeah, in a certain way because we all have different perspectives, but yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah.
But Rick, what do you want to be when you were a kid? You want to be an astronomer or a medic, or did you have like a specific kind of like, 6-year-old kind of fantasy or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. I think I took the Peter Pan oath and decided that I would never grow up. Gemini rising, the eternally, youthful puer who's in denial of aging. I think I still have some of that at 76 years of age, which I am. Um,
Wow.
um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I as a kid, I read a lot of science fiction,
Uh-huh.
and I certainly thought about, captaining spaceships and things of that sort. As I grew older, I realized that I had a great affinity towards math and science, even though I
Mhm.
love literature and reading, and that was always an important part of my life. But I actually went to college to be a geometry teacher. That was what I thought I was
Ah.
going to be, was a math teacher, but geometry in particular, because I loved the whole spatial and how geometry somehow was tied up with things that were just not just counting, that was somehow more important. And I did very well in school. I mean, incredibly well in math. And I landed in college in 19 September of 1967,
Mhm.
when the 60s were just basically exploding. And within a month of being in college, I changed my major from math to psychology. And and I have a BA in psychology, and I
Wow.
intended to be a Jungian analyst. That was my, I mean, I fell deep into even as a kid, I mean, 12, 13 years old, I found myself in the library, and I devoured pretty much all the books in our little library in town. But I found myself in the library reading Freud and Jung and deep psychological stuff that, quite frankly, as a 12, 13, 14-year-old, I really didn't understand what the hell I was reading, but I was totally reading it and drawn into it, and it was important. And when I became a psych major, I totally, I mean, I'm one of those weirdos who's actually read almost everything that Carl Jung wrote, and also read a lot of Freud's work and the work of many of his students, and including, people like Eric Fromm and Carl, well, and actually Wilhelm Reich, who is, I think, a very important character in that whole scenario. We could come back to that if you want later. But point being that by the time, I went to college in the late 60s, graduated in 71, and that was a period of time that Ram Dass says that if you live through that period of time, if if you live through the 60s, you don't remember them. Well, I lived through them and I remember them. And there was, a bit of exploration and yoga and Eastern philosophy and change of diet and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I fell deep into all of that as a student, and including astrology. And
Mm.
and even in my early teen years, I was reading books, not just science books and science fiction, but I was reading a lot of books on things like UFOs and hypnosis and psychic studies and life after death and stranger than science things. And so astrology was just one of a whole host of things
Mhm.
that I was interested in. But
Yeah.
astrology became a thing. And that combined with Jung and reading Jung's work on astrology, in particular, symbols of transfiguration and alchemical studies that were available at that time. Um, I was given a book by a friend, and I don't remember who this was, but I can visualize someone coming over to the house I was living in my senior year at college saying, "Hey, I found this book. I think you might like it." And the book was The Astrology of Personality by Dane Rudhyar. And I had been
Ah.
already reading astrology and looking at charts. There were no computers then. And so, we were looking up rising signs and planets in signs and things of that sort. But when I read that book, it changed my life because I realized that I was not going to go and get a PhD in psychology and be a Jungian analyst. I was not going to the Jungian Institute. I basically was going to be an astrologer. Now, at that time in 1969, 70, 71, I didn't know any astrologers. I didn't know what an astrologer really was. The closest I got to it was a book by Sidney Omar, who wrote the sun sign column in the Los Angeles Times for 20 or 30 years.
Mhm.
And he wrote a book called My Life in Astrology. But he was an astrologer to Hollywood, and he had a
Mhm.
very different, it wasn't a normal astrologer. And yet there was something in me that just said, this is what you're going to do.
Wow.
And I had no idea really what that meant. All I knew is that I never really learned astrology.
Mhm.
I just kind of remembered it. And I know that I've heard other astrologers say that too. But for me, that was very real. Somehow, when I read astrology, I always felt like I knew more than what I just read about it. And geez, in my mid late 20s, I was proficient. I thought I knew everything I ever needed to know about astrology. Of course, now in my 70s, I realize I don't know shit. And there's like so much, it's like when people say, master astrologer, I cringe because there's a part of me that just knows how much I don't know. And even though I've carved out an area of expertise based upon my experience, that's really all we can do because it's so vast. And it's like the many-headed hydra. Every time you cut off one, two grow back. And
Mhm.
every time you answer a question, two questions appear, in place of the one. And so, no, I'm a student. I consider myself beginner's mind as an astrologer, even though I have a lot of experience, and I'll
Mhm.
certainly, my Gemini rising combined with all of my Aries forcefulness with Pluto involved will sound like it knows a lot more than I really think I know.
Right. What do you say? Because you have an MC in Aquarius, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of makes sense in a way,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my Aquarius midheaven with Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars and the North Node all in the 11th house,
Hmm.
and Uranus, the modern ruler of Aquarius, in my first house, first planet rising. When
Hmm.
people ask me my sign while I'm in my Cancer moon denial mode, I just tell them, oh, I'm an Aquariarian.
That's a good one.
And they go,
That's
huh?
nice.
See, I make up words. Yeah, I'm an Aquariarian. And I don't
Aquariarian.
planets in Aquarius, but I have an Aquarius midheaven, four planets, and the North Node in the 11th house, which is the house of Aquarius,
Mm,
and Uranus, the planet of
of course.
Aquarius, rising. And I also have Saturn closely sextile Uranus. And so Saturn as the ancient ruler, the traditional ruler of Aquarius.
I'm just curious to think how you feel with that Jupiter in 29 Capricorn, because Pluto,
I like my Jupiter.
yeah.
Um, and I am not, how do I want to say this without pissing people off? I I do not place a lot of use or value on traditional dignity and debility, although
Mhm.
I look at it and I understand why it works and how it works. But I think that many people who learn astrology through the Vedic, or in particular the Hellenistic lens, put way too much weight. I mean, my Jupiter in Capricorn is technically debilitated
Uh-huh.
because it's in its fall, because it's opposite Cancer, where it's exalted.
Uh-huh.
And Jupiter's my only Earth planet in my chart, and I love it.
Right.
And I'm the person who often, when someone's saying, "Hey Rick, do you want to?" I'm going yes before I hear what they're asking. But my Jupiter in Capricorn is the part of me that I don't care what it is that someone presents to me, I can see what's wrong with it. It's not a Virgo, this is what's wrong with it. It's more a sense of here's where this might not work unless we attend to this. And that Jupiter in
Wow.
Capricorn at 29 and a half degrees, I look at it as an Aquarius wannabe. you know, it's progressed into Aquarius, but it's
Right.
still in Capricorn. And the other important thing about my Jupiter at 29 and a half degrees of Capricorn is that it's partile, meaning same degree, quincunx to Saturn at
Yeah.
29 degrees and 50 minutes Leo, and that Saturn is retrograde. So my Saturn, Jupiter Saturn quincunx is within a third of a degree of orb, and that's really, really tight. And that aspect, I was going to say it makes me crazy, but it really makes people around me crazier than it makes me, as aspects often do, because we get used to what we have in our chart, even if it's crazy. And that Jupiter Saturn quincunx, basically, if I have a deadline, for 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, and I was going to do it, let's say, tonight, and someone at 10 o'clock says, "Hey, there's a party, you want to go?" And I'll go, "Yeah." And I'll figure out, I'll come home at 3 in the morning or 4 in
Wow.
the morning and still, meet the deadline, or at least be close to it. And that's that imbalance between, the discipline, which I often lack, but somehow pulled together in the last
Mm.
moment. I have a standard thing that I tell people that I work with in various organizations, and that is, if there's a deadline, if I'm not timely, I just don't want to be the last person to submit. Meaning, I don't want to hold up the entire
Mm.
show,
Yeah.
but I often do kind of run into deadlines and push them. But I wrote a daily horoscope column 7 days a week for 20 and a half years,
Wow.
that I had a deadline at 6 a.m. every day. I mean, a real deadline, that I had to have things done that were 7 days out from that day, because this all went into a Google online database, went through an editorial process.
Wow.
I mean, I had, 10 to 20 million readers a day when I was writing this column. It was the daily horoscope column on Google, on Yahoo, on AOL, on MySpace, LA Times, Huffington Post. I mean,
Wow.
if you read your daily horoscopes somewhere between 2002 and 2020 online, chances are, whether you knew it or not, they were mine.
It
I
was
mean,
you.
other people were writing too. But my point is that I would often be writing still at 5 in the morning, because I didn't do it earlier in the day when I could have. And I'm not saying I'm proud of this part of me. Like I said, it makes people I work with often, crazier than it makes me. But I've learned over the years, as one learns from a quincunx, often you learn something that you can do from something that just seems to be a total annoyance and irritation. And one of the things that I do really well is I compress time, and I can do a crazy amount of a
Mm.
lot in a very little time. And I sometimes envy, even though I do try to emulate, and although I've gotten better at it, using more sensible Saturn. But, my Saturn, aside from its sextile to Uranus, is a square and a half or a half a square to pretty much everything in my chart. It's definitely, I mean, as a kid with the Uranus rising and a problematic Saturn, I could be reading the best book I ever read. If it was assigned in class, I'd stop reading it.
Yeah, I see.
And
That's
again, I'm not
yeah.
saying I'm proud of this, but that's part of the rebellion, that I carried through at least a lot of my life.
No, but I think you just gave us a positive outlook for quincunxes, because sometimes they are labeled as like annoying, and no, I'm stuck here, or and you just gave us an example of how it can actually work out
Yeah,
pretty
but
well.
I also think, Myra, I also
Mhm.
think that quincunxes are actually not very well understood,
Mm.
because a quincunx with a 1 or 2 degree orb, either early or late, is
Uh,
actually going to be more functioning like a biquintile or a triseptile. And I know a
uh,
lot of traditional astrologers, don't use these harmonic aspects, many of which were invented or discovered by Johannes Kepler.
mhm.
But the point here is that quincunxes are a bit of magic. They occur at the mathematically least stable point in the 360-degree cycle,
Mhm.
because there's no other point in in the cycle that is so resonant. A quincunx is 5 quinc unx 12. It's 5/12,
Okay, okay.
and that's 150 degrees.
Mhm.
144 degrees is 2/5.
Mhm.
That's a biquintile.
Mhm.
154 and change is 3/7. That's a
Mm.
triseptile. And so, if you understand harmonics, if you understand aspects as harmonics, meaning as music, the
Mhm.
music of the spheres is that the lower the harmonic, the louder the note. It's why an octave, which is a second harmonic, sounds so resonant, whereas other notes played together don't sound quite as resonant. They can get lost. And so the thing about the quincunx is it's totally unstable, because it's halfway between the fifth and the seventh harmonic, and it's a 12th harmonic. It's 5/12. So the quincunx is irritating, because we can't hold that position, because it wants to flip to the 2/5 or flip to the 3/7. And so one of the most used keywords for a quincunx is adjustment or irritation. It's irritating because we can't hold that position.
I love it. That's such good news for all of us who, or well, I think I also misunderstood, or still need to do more readings or more classes about quincunxes, because I think they are misunderstood, and I have a lot of quincunxes in my chart. And it's
Yeah.
nice to hear like a different perspective, like a really positive perspective about these aspects that, in the end, these are more important than the planet position or the houses, I think. But Rick, tell us, how was your experience with your first natal reading? Somebody read your chart, and what were your impressions? I'm guessing somebody read your chart at some point or something.
Yeah, I've had my chart done a few times.
Mhm.
I think the very first time I was probably maybe about 26 or 25, and I'd already been studying astrology. But this chart was done for me by someone who is a yoga teacher. Um, and um, and I was pretty amazed at what she could say about my chart. But in those days, chart readings were very different than we do now. They were more what the tradition refers to as a delineation. And a delineation basically is your sun is in Aries, it means this. It's in the 11th house, it means that. Your moon is in Cancer, that means this. It's in the second house, means that. Your sun and moon are square, that means. And it's basically breaking the chart down. And so by the end of that reading, I had an outsider looking at my chart telling me what every planet and every house and every aspect was in my chart. When I do readings today, like many astrologers, I'll get through an entire reading and I may not even mention their sun sign or where such and such a planet is, because it's like you could spend hours pulling everything apart. When I see a new client, I almost always ask, have you ever had your chart done before? Don't tell me by who, but when was it and what do you remember from it? And the most common answer is, oh yeah, I had my chart done, blah, 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 by fill in the name of some famous astrologer. And what do you remember? Oh, it was amazing. I go, but tell me what you got out of it. What do you remember? Well, I don't remember anything specifically. I just remember it was really good. And I decided that if I had a client who was asked 30 years later, did you ever have a reading? Yeah, with who? Rick Levine. What was it? That sucker said blah, blah, blah. And so the question becomes, and I think this goes back to an Albert Einstein quote, and if you're talking personal stuff, another thing that I should admit is that I am a quoteaholic. I've been offered the cure, but I refuse to take it. And I love quotes because there are so many people who said things that I wish I said in ways better than I would say it. But my boy Albert Einstein, I say my in a non-possessive way, Albert Einstein said that 99% of genius is knowing what's important. And I had that sign above my desk for years on a little poster, because I think often when we do readings, it's very easy to get lost in all the details. I know a lot of astrologers who will do a reading for 1 year and they'll talk about all the aspects that happen for that year. On October 17th, Mercury will be conjoining your natal Venus, blah, 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 blah. And then on October 23rd, Saturn will be conjuncting your sun, blah, 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 blah. And then on November 5th, Venus, as if they're all the same thing, And so somehow the person leaves with their head filled with dates. And then because, let's say, Pluto is going to be conjoining or squaring your natal moon in 1 year and a week, that doesn't fit into the 1 year. And so that's never mentioned. And sometimes the most important thing in someone's chart, that when you're seeing someone as a client, sometimes the singular most important thing happened last year or won't happen for a year or two. And so I don't remember what the question was, but that's my answer.
No, what were your impressions when someone read your chart for the first time?
I was blown away, and then a couple of years later, when I was studying more seriously, I had my chart read by an American astrologer named everyone knew him as Bob Jansky, who wrote a number of books, one on the quincunxes, and that was the first time I realized, oh, I have a finger of God in my chart, a yod. And so I was like, 25 years old then. And so for a good 50 years, I've been particularly interested, not just in yods, but in the larger class of configurations that are actually isosceles triangles. And an isosceles triangle is a triangle that has two sides the same. A yod, you have a sextile with two quincunxes. But if you open up the base of that to a square, you have a square with two sesquisquares. If you open it up, if you close it down to a septile, you have 3 points on a 7-pointed star. You have a septile and two triseptiles. Or a 5-pointed star, which may be the most powerful of all the odds. You have a quintile, which is 72 degrees. That's if you imagine a 5-pointed star, you have a planet on two adjacent points and a 5-pointed star. and then one on the opposite point. So you have 3 out of 5 points on a 5-pointed star. And you see that really exact in charts like William Blake and Mozart and poets and creators. I mean, in Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud and writers. I mean, it's just and so you begin to realize that astrology has been totally taken over and limited by a patriarchal view of the world being material, the three-dimensional world, which is based upon division by 12. And when you divide by 5, you get the magic of the 5-pointed star, the feminine earth religions, the occult
Wow.
traditions, or divisions by 7 or 9 or 11. And that's where the magic begins to happen.
That's so interesting. You're opening my brain because
It's
I
part of my
have
job. Jeff Green once told me, Jeff Green once told me years ago, I mean, like, I don't know, 30 plus years ago.
Jeffrey
Uh,
Wolfgren.
Jeff,
This.
Jeffrey
Oh,
Wolf Green. It was
uh-huh.
Jeff. Yeah,
What did he
Jeff.
say?
Well, my Pluto is in the third house,
Hmm,
and
hmm.
it's trine my sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars in the 11th.
It is.
And I have Gemini rising with my horoscope ruler being Mercury,
Hmm,
also trining Pluto in the third house in Gemini's house.
hmm.
Then he basically looked at my chart. This was just casual; it wasn't a reading. And he said, "Yeah, you only have one purpose here on Earth, and that's to blow people's minds. And that's my goal. That's my goal."
Oh, that's so interesting and fascinating because I think in my chart there is a 5 point star, but one of the peaks it's like not finished. It's like this,
And if you were a client of mine, I would want to calculate within a few degrees because there's usually a little bit of slop. I would want to calculate where is that missing point in the 5-pointed star. 4 out of 5 points on a 5-pointed star, I call a golden bowl because quintiles are based upon the golden mean, the divine proportion, which in art is the point of aesthetic perfection, its beauty. It's tied to the Venus star. But 4 out of 5 points on a grand quintile is a golden bowl. And I want to know what that missing point is because when transiting planets go through that missing point, or when you meet people with planets at that point, that resonates on a non-physical dimension that actually is a soul attractor. And so there's something there to explore.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, really, really. This is the missing piece of the puzzle for me. So thank you. But back to you, Rick.
By
You've
the way,
been,
by the way,
yeah.
by the way, the
Hmm.
missing piece of the puzzle is not the missing piece. It's all the missing pieces of the puzzle. And to pull the quotaholic back, Heraclitus, Greek mathematician, philosopher, said, the hidden harmony is always better than the apparent.
Ah,
Ah.
that's nice. Let's
Anyhow,
see. I will
you
definitely
you were going to say something else,
do my
though.
homework. Yeah, I wanted to ask you because you've been doing astrology for, I don't know, like 55 years or more. Was there ever a moment in which you felt like astrology failed you or you got tired of it or something like that? And how was the
Yeah,
moment?
in my early mid 30s, I basically reached a point where I thought, what if I'm making all this shit up? What if we're all making this up? And it really, I know about, confirmation bias, and I know about self-fulfilling prophecies. And I mean, what if this whole thing is just totally made? And I convinced myself that maybe this whole thing was a fantasy. And I took all of my astrology books, programs, which it was actually no, I already had an astrology program at that time. But I basically took all my books, all my astrology stuff, in fact, all of my music and poetry. If I didn't have to make a living being an astrologer, I would just read and write poetry, quite honestly. That's as close as music can get to language. And I really like that aspect. Um, but for about 2 years, I did no astrology at all. All my astrology books were literally in cartons in a garage.
Wow. What made you come back to astrology?
I got into what some people would call an accident. I call it a purpose.
Okay.
um, because often accidents are not accidental at all. They're basically the cosmos saying, "You're fucking up. We're taking over."
See.
At that time, I was living in Southern California. I was working actually at the first store in the world that sold computer software without selling hardware. So this was in
Mhm.
1981, 82, 82, 83. And I was very involved in computer software and computer distribution, software retailing. And my love at that time though was I was roller skating maybe 5 days a week down at the beach. I was a Venice Beach roller skater, and every day I would before I went into the office, I would go down to the beach and strap on my roller skates and roller skate between Santa Monica Pier and Venice Pier and back. And then I would jump in the water, bob in the waves for a bit, have coffee on the beach, and then go to
Mhm.
work. I did that every day. And one day I skated out to the end of Venice Pier. And it was actually at a time in my life when I remembered, even though I wasn't doing astrology at the time, that Uranus was moving through mid degrees of Sagittarius, and it was making a grand trine in my chart with Pluto at mid Leo and all of my Aries stellium in mid Aries,
Mm.
and my descendant at 1516 Sagittarius, that
Mhm.
as Uranus was moving through that over my descendant, it was making a grand trine. And I always thought that would be the cool time in my life. So I was standing out on the end of Venice Pier on a gorgeous morning, and I looked out and I could see Catalina Island off the coast of Malibu. And I took a deep breath, thinking, wow, what a cool life. And as I took that breath, I was struck by not real, but metaphysical lightning, and I fell, standing still.
You're kidding me, really? Wow.
And I blocked my fall with my right hand, which I cut open. And I was actually going scuba diving the following day, but my hand was bleeding so bad and it was an open wound. I actually drove myself to the emergency room, had it x-rayed. There was no break. They gave me a tetanus shot. And 5 days later, I woke up with red streaks all the way up my arm, and I knew that wasn't good. I have a friend who is a doctor. He said, get your ass in here right now. And I spent the next week and a half in a hospital, in and out of a coma, having, intravenous antibiotics. And normal people have a near-death experience that lasts, 3 minutes, 10 minutes. I was in and out for like 3 or 4 days. It was kind of crazy. But when I came out of that, I had no use of my right hand. Now, I am a very right-handed, left-brained kind of guy.
Mhm.
All those planets in Aries and fire and air stuff.
Mhm.
And I, my arm was all bandaged up and everything. I
I
had to
wow.
sleep with my arm elevated. I could not shave. I could not eat soup. I couldn't brush my teeth. I couldn't button my shirt or zip up my pants. I mean, I couldn't drive my standard shift, gear shift in my car. I was, and during that period of time, I was on a disability insurance, and over the course of weeks and a couple of months, the books started coming out of the garage. And it was from that period of reintegrating that I realized that this whole accident, and from it, you can see, well, let me get that in front of the camera. I landed on that spot right
Oh
there,
my
and
God.
I had an operation,
Yeah.
but that knuckle is gone. I can't quite position it so you can see it.
Oh.
But this is a physical reminder that that although I could make a lot of money and be a corporate success, which is what I was doing at that point,
Mm.
that I was not allowed to do that.
Yeah, because I've heard in other, I think, classes or interviews that you developed some software with some partner or something like that back in the days, right? Or was it
Yeah,
after?
yeah. Well, I actually was involved in software retailing and distribution. And I mean, I wrote a lot of my own code when computers first began to happen. But I've never written astrology software. I was involved
Ah,
in a project. Geez, I'm guessing this was 1980. I was involved in a project with a British astrologer named Roger Elliott, where we were actually using a computer to create reports, which was still relatively new at that time. But I've not ever written astrology software, although when I started with my then astrology buddy and partner, Jeff Jower, in 1999,
uh-huh,
we started stariq.com, which was really
uh-huh.
one of the maybe first two or three real astrology sites on the internet. It was around the same time that Alois Treindl started Astrodienst or Astro.com.
Mm.
And we basically developed software. I didn't write the software, but I managed the development of software that would basically send an email out 2 or 3 or 4 times a month to a registrant 2 or 3 days before the most important transits to their chart that month.
Oh, wow.
And no one has ever duplicated that, or there have been attempts, and we were basically caught up in what many people call the .com .bomb. You know, we had 17 full-time no 14 full-time employees, and it was costing us about $50,000 a month just to keep our doors open in development. And we had financing, and then the entire market in 2000 2001 fell apart, and basically we just left that and never went back to it. I lost interest. I mean, it was basically a year and a half or two of doing nothing but working on that project. And no one's ever really done it in the way that we conceived it, that I conceived it, but that we really kind of began to make it happen. And yeah, and I'm not interested in that anymore. I have other, as we say, other fish to fry. Not that I eat fish these days, but
So talking about, all those other things, and what do you believe your soul is still learning in this lifetime outside of astrology?
oh, how to be a human. I don't
That's
think there's anything else that our soul, well, it's actually how to be a human while not losing connection,
Mhm.
contact with, the cosmos. It's why I always say think cosmically, act locally, because the cosmic part of it, let me get this right. There we go. The camera is weird. Okay, there we go. The cosmic part of it, is the spirit, and the
Mhm.
local part of it is the spirit encapsulated in a three-dimensional body, the soul. And so spirit and soul become part of why I think it's so important for us to, keep the two of those together. And I have to say also, although you didn't ask me, and I'm glad you didn't, because it's a question that everyone asks, and that's, so why did you become an astrologer? Or, and my answer is different. Most people say, oh, I became an astrologer because I thought it was crap and I set out to disprove it. And the more I studied, the more I realized there was something there. Or I went to an astrologer and it changed my life. It was amazing. Or my life
Mhm.
was a mess and astrology explained. I mean, my reason is very different.
Mhm.
And that is that my Gemini rising is incurably curious. And at age 19, I actually honed the question that is still the question that drives me, although some, nearly 60 years later, I feel like I have a good handle on this. At the time that I began asking it, I really didn't at all. And the question that I framed at age 19 was this: how does meta become physical?
Oh,
And I
wow.
don't mean meta, meaning the company. But in other words, how does, as you look around my space or your space, I have all these things, photographs of events and books that I've read and memorabilia from different things in my life and different pieces of artwork that have meaning to me and for just things and photographs of people, whether they're parents or children or siblings or
Mhm.
loves, or how do we, what is it that magnetizes or creates
Yeah,
this
wow.
constellation? I use that word, considerably, or I mean, I consider using that word. Um, or I should say, it is a consideration that I use that word correctly, is what I was trying to say. What is it that creates this ability to constellate these things that we then call our lives? These
Mhm.
things don't exist. They start from nothingness and somehow manifest into the three-dimensional world through relationships, experiences,
Mhm.
physicality, location, parents, children, friends, lover, whatever.
Mhm.
And what is it that makes invisibleness, emptiness, nothingness become somethingness?
Mhm.
And
That's really deep.
astrology is
Mhm.
not the answer, but it's the best consistent map that I've been able to find,
Mhm.
because it's ultimately based upon geometry. And here
Mhm.
I am, after
Right.
not being a geometry teacher, and anyone who's taken any classes from me, or you see how I work with chart interpretations, I'm a geometry teacher. Astrology is geometrical. It is sacred geometry. The universe is
Mhm.
manifest by things coming into our perceptual realms, and we need to clarify that, because the fact is that scientists now understand that there is some 94% of what's out there is either dark energy or dark matter. We
Mhm.
can't see it, perceive it, measure it, weigh it. We have no idea what it is. We just know it's out there. And so when I talk about how things manifest geometrically through sacred geometry and planets become an artifact in that, um, the question becomes, what is that process? And it is, in my mind, archetypally geometric, based upon the planets and their resonances.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you managed to, I mean, from your story, from what I've heard, I mean, you like psychology, geometry, um, and all these sacred things, and the understanding of the metaphysical and astrology, like kind of like blends all of those together. That's why I thought, okay, maybe he was pretty clear on his on his choice. But understanding the meta, as you say, and the astrology behind the technical, educational part of the astrology, the aspects, but the what is it with the planets that, the manifestation we see on our personal lives, or that resonance. This is the part that I understand you're trying to explain. How has that journey been for you in the understanding? Has it been, like, have you, I mean, I'm sure you have challenges, but like, maybe you felt misunderstood because not everyone sees this part of astrology as you do. Like, what can you tell us about that journey into understanding this specific part of astrology and the meta and the physical?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they become familiar with my work, it resonates with them because my work isn't original. It's going back to the Robin Hood idea. I just know who to steal the brilliant thoughts from. I mean, I haven't made anything up other than the Mercury Gemini dance of connecting dots that other people hadn't connected. The dots are all there. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, whether you're coming from a point of, Hindu or Buddhist, conceptualization, or any of even the Western mystical traditions or the ancient indigenous, pieces, they're all there. Pythagoras basically, over 2,000 years ago, uh, countered Democritus, who came up with this idea that everything is particle-based atoms. And Pythagoras said, no, everything is vibration,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a Pythagorean. Everything is vibration. No thing exists in the universe. No thing exists in the universe.
Mm.
Things are illusion. Things are what Hindu scholars would call Maya, which is the veil that prevents us from seeing what real reality is. And particles are, whether it's the particle of your physical body or mine, or planet Earth, or a computer, or a refrigerator, or a car, or anything, these are all vibrations that are just geometrically held together by nodes. Because when vibrations crisscross one another, they create what a scientist calls a nodal point. A node is just a knot. Light ties itself up into knots where it crisscrosses itself, and it slows down enough that it impinges on our sensory mechanism. And I think it was Albert Einstein who said reality is an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. you know, uh, and I always think of Rob Hand, who wrote, I think, in Horoscope Symbols, his first or second book, I think. He wrote, um, astrologers used to teach that Saturn is reality and Neptune is illusion. Whereas now we know that Neptune is reality and Saturn is the illusion there was one.
The illusion there was one. Okay, I got it.
What we see is not what we get. And so, yeah, again, I'm sorry, but I forgot what your question was.
Oh, don't worry, I also forgot. But let's jump to the next question. We were talking about, we were talking about how do you feel in that process of understanding this particular part of astrology.
I'm never, I'm double negative intended here. I'm never not amazed at the extraordinary way people fulfill their imagery, the imagery of their charts. It's one of the magical things about doing individual chart interpretation. As you may know, I run an apprentice program, and every month we do a mystery guest chart where I bring a chart without a name on it, and we untangle the dynamics of the person without knowing who the person is. And yesterday, for example, we did the chart of Martin Luther King. And one of the people said, God, this person, it's like they have a dream that they need to realize. I mean, and someone said, I have a dream. And I just basically didn't react to it because I didn't want to give away who it was. But there's something about how we take the archetypal energy of a chart and manifest it in ways that an astrologer would never guess. And I love that because when you hear people's stories, they're always so extraordinary and so beyond and outside of what you might think if you just followed the words of this in that means this and this square that means that. Bullshit. It means whatever it is that you fulfill that imagery with in your life. And I think that it's very dangerous for astrologers to assume that they know what any particular planetary position or aspect is, because there is no planetary position or aspect that operates by itself, because like the Hindus called Indra's net, they believed the cosmos was this net of pearls where every pearl at every nodal point, at every knot, the word node just means knot in Greek, in Latin, I believe, not Greek, that every pearl, every knot on the net, when you looked into the pearl, you could see the entire net reflected in it.
Oh, wow.
And this is referred to as Indra's net. And so everything is connected to everything. And from that standpoint, I'm always amazed at how people make those connections in their lives. I also, believe that you cannot look at a chart and tell whether a person, is the Dalai Lama or a serial rapist. There is the idea of yoga, and I don't mean sitting and doing postures. I mean harnessing the power of the ox. Yoga comes from the word yoke, the yoke of the oxen, and whatever the chart is, I have a strong problem with people saying, "Oh, that's a really bad chart." No such thing as a bad chart. It's what we do with it. And granted, some charts are more difficult than other charts, but sometimes it's the easiest charts on the surface that create the hardest lives because the lives are empty and there's nothing that the person gets to do with it. This idea, that we get handed down from the ancient tradition that squares are bad or difficult or afflictions and trines are, grace or benefit or good, is really dangerous because trines are often where we get stuck. The energy flows so easily, we can't get traction. We can't. Grand trine. You leave the marriage, you change the job, you move to another country, and 3 years later, your life is the same mess it was before you made all those changes. Whereas a square, traditionally, Saturn square Mars, horrible. But a person who learns how to do their yoga, their discipline, and harness that energy, that's the person who's going to become the doctor who heals people's lives or the whatever. So we have to be really careful about making assumptions based upon what we think we know. And I often say that astrologers largely suffer from the same thing that people who practice fundamentalist religions, modern Western medicine, and modern science suffer from. And that is the belief they know more than they do. We sometimes, as astrologers, think we have the answer in the chart. We have the questions.
No, that's so beautiful that you also remind us of this. It's not only what we think. I think it's also with astrology, we need to constantly keep an open mind to new perspectives, to new. Nothing is like determined, you say, oh, it's a square. It just means this. I think
beginner's mind. Zen calls it beginner's mind.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. But Rick, I need to ask you about your chart because I think your chart is getting quite activated. We have Saturn and Neptune entering Aries. They're going to touch on your stellium. How do you feel about it? What do you think? What do you foresee for yourself? Tell us a little bit more. Maybe people find it interesting.
Well, okay. First of all, I think that when we look forward to an aspect with fear, we actually help coalesce or manifest that energy. I've seen so many astrologers who go, "Oh my God, Pluto's coming to conjunct my natal moon. I'm so freaked out. I'm worried about who's going to die or how I'm going to this or I don't know how it's going to manifest. I know that I know that in previous Saturn transits, they always remind me of how much work I have to do or how much work I should have already done, which is a bit of a theme in my life. I would like to think that I'm doing some of that work proactively because Saturn will be in mid-Aries, in a year and a half or two, whereas Neptune will take another 5 or 6 years to get close enough there to matter. But I have 6 planets in mid-cardinal. So when Saturn, hits maybe is a bad word. When Saturn moves through mid-Aries or mid-Cancer, where my moon is, Aries, where my stellium is, or mid-Libra, where my Neptune is, which opposes my Aries and squares my moon, or mid-Capricorn, these are times of dynamic change.
Okay.
And, and I am eagerly looking forward to managing and or moving through these changes with as much awareness and grace as I can. What that means, can't tell you yet, but I'll keep you posted.
Interesting.
And again, there's a lot of other stuff, of course, going on during
Yeah.
this period of time
Yes.
because while Saturn is moving through mid Aries, we also, have the planets at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, of fire and air, also rattling their own signals. And so I again, nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything is connected to everything else.
Yeah. Same as your Uranus now entering your rising sign, that must be exciting, I guess.
And coming into my Uranus return, which is still a handful of years away, because my Uranus is at 27, I think, of Gemini. And but yeah.
And currently Jupiter gonna meet your moon also.
Yeah.
Right? So that's exciting.
So I'm fat and happy.
Also, how was for you that transit of like Pluto moving into Aquarius, touching on your Jupiter? What would you say? Was there a lesson or a fear that you had and you overcame, or
Yeah, no,
lessons?
I think that the Pluto on my natal Jupiter, which is really still going on because my progressed Jupiter, is at about 1 degree of Aquarius.
Okay.
And I think that this is something that's an interesting, I don't want to say technique, but something for astrologers to keep in mind who are do transit work. And that is that often the slower moving planets, as they progress, whether they're progressing direct or retrograde, often suggests that a planet, let's say that Jupiter had just turned retrograde when I was born, and therefore Jupiter now would have retrograded from let's say 29 degrees of Capricorn. Let's say progressed Jupiter had retrograded back to 27 degrees of Capricorn. That would, to me, suggest that Pluto's conjunction with my natal Jupiter in Capricorn would have begun earlier. Whereas now, because my progressed Jupiter is at 1 or 2 degrees of Aquarius, even though transiting Pluto is officially done with its conjunction, it's still in the neighborhood, but it's still actually not partile, but perfecting its conjunction with my progressed Jupiter. And so that energy is still there. And I feel a widening, a universalization, a growth to what it is that I've been doing. You look at, I did a podcast with Amrit Sandhu on inspiring evolution back in January or February. It got over 600,000 views.
Oh my God.
And and that, to me, although I don't think the planets make anything happen.
Yes.
I think that that's kind of part of the archetypal imagery of Pluto on Jupiter.
Very interesting, fascinating. Thank you for this, Rick. So, what do you do when you're bored, when you're tired of astrology, and you just want to have like a chill day, and what do you do? Well, for fun.
Cancer Moon, I go to the kitchen and cook.
You cook, really?
Oh, I love cooking.
What do you cook?
Anything you could. Jeff, my old astrology buddy, said that you could get picked up by aliens who, took you up into a spaceship and took your body apart, put it back together, dropped you off on the side of a road in the middle of the desert where a large Lincoln Continental driven by these bad looking guys came, picked you, threw you in the trunk, and then opened up the trunk and rolled you out in front of someone's house, and they said 10 people in 2 hours dinner, and you do it, you know.
Oh wow,
I like
okay.
cooking. I like cooking anything.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, I love, cooking Italian stuff. I love cooking.
Oh, totally.
I love flavors. I love Indian, Indonesian, Indian. It doesn't matter. I like, and I learned to cook because I like to eat. And so the tasting thing is an important piece. But I also play music. I mean, whether I
Mm-hmm.
listen to music, these days I kind of hung up most of my other instruments. I play, flutes and recorders and Native American flutes, and I think there's one back there on a music stand. I don't know if you can see it. It's right there, I think, somewhere, with music. And I mean, I play a little bit, and not as much as I want. I read.
Mm-hmm.
I go to the gym, not as often as I want. I have a little shoulder injury that's been bugging me, but I swim when I can.
Nice.
I don't mind sitting in a hot tub every day for, a half an hour if I can. I like walking. I like nature. I like hanging out with friends. I like, communicating. There's a local coffee house where I do my monthly astrology night, and I have friends. It's kind of like our little local Cheers bar. There's always some of the
Oh,
same people hanging
cool.
out there. So, um, I've probably left off some important things, but um, and I love reading and writing poetry. I don't write much these
You have
days.
a poetry book, no? I remember, or
I've actually
something.
published a few books of
Uh,
poetry. Um,
yeah, I
and
remember.
and
Yeah.
often when I teach, although I don't have any I don't have many poems that are specifically astrological, but I do have poems that I use as part of my teaching, just because they, again, poetry. And even when I teach, often, not so much when I'm doing an hour lecture at a conference, but I'll often use music because,
Yes.
music is so important, especially music with lyrics. I love, I like music that has no lyrics, but I also am a lyric person and have my list of 5 or 10 or 15 poets and or musical lyricists that I really like their stuff, and I'll often use their work to make points in teaching. That, because again, it's better
Yes.
than I can explain.
That's how we learn astrology with you. I remember when I took your first class, the foundations one.
Yeah,
You actually were playing even the piano for us to understand the how you call
the chordal structure. Yeah,
yeah, the
how
chord
notes
and
work with harmony. Yeah,
yeah, those and
harmonics.
the harmonics. Yes, I remember that. And I played the piano and I was like, oh wow, like it makes sense now because it was such a fun class where you were mixing astrology with music and you were actually playing the pianos. That was really fun. But so I'm assuming, maybe I'm making a wrong assumption, but when you will feel like lost or sad or something like that, what do? You go back to music, or do you have like a you just chill?
Drugs. No, I have a claim to fame, and that is I've probably smoked more pot in my life than, cannabis, than many people, but I've never smoked it legally, and it's been legal here where I live for 20 years now.
Uh-huh.
These days, I mean, my drugs of choice are red wine and, and caffeine. Um,
Yeah.
but you know, I don't think I have a simple answer. I mean, music, hanging out with friends, sometimes, the Cancer moon, just, being quiet, sometimes
Yeah.
just going away from it all. And then with so many fire planets, sometimes, that it motivates me to do something about something.
Hmm, hmm.
Um, but yeah, that varies, and I keep, my life is pretty full. I mean, I have a lot of things coming up that I'm looking forward to. As you may know, I do an annual retreat in Goa, India. That's
Hmm.
a 2 week initiation into astrology, for whether it's for beginners and practicing professionals. It's complete one end of the spectrum to the other. and I'll be back there in November 20th through December 2nd of this year. And there's still a few spots left. I think we have 25 people signed up, and I think we have room for about 30. It'll fill up, but if anyone's interested, this would be your time to go to heavenandearthworkshops.com, because that will fill up. And then, aside from other conferences, I'll be speaking at the Kepler Symposium in Niagara Falls, doing a master class on astrologer as agent of change, social agent of change. And I'll be doing the keynote address for the conference on the future of astrology. And then I'll be doing a 3-day intensive in chart interpretation at the OPA, that's the Organization for Professional Astrology conference outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, up in the mountains, in Park City, outside of Salt Lake City. That's in mid-October. Wow. And then next spring, actually in March, I'm going to be on a 2-week Aegean Sea cruise. What? That's going to be, it's called the Mystery School Cruise. And I'll be one of about a dozen speakers. It's a luxury. It's the top end of the cruise, and will be our ports of call. We sail out of Athens, and we'll be going to Crete and Corfu and some spot in Turkey, and down the Aegean and then back up. And wow. and I'm really excited about that. And if anyone's interested in that, they should just contact me directly. That information is just coming out in the days ahead. Okay. But that's exciting, and that's the Mystery School Cruise. Mystery School Cruise.
That's that's somewhere I can go. So yeah, I'm gonna bother you with that later on, because it's not too far from where I live. The other ones are like Niagara Falls.
No, I get it.
Too far, but
I get it. And this is. And I'm excited about that, because I've never been to that part of the world. I've been,
Greece and Turkey. I mean, my dream to go to Greece, and it's just, it's not too far, but I've just never done it. So this is the perfect excuse for my 40-something birthday coming up sometime. Rick, it's been such a pleasure. Is there anything you want to, tell the audience about astrology? As we are in this era where there are many people joining this, the knowledge of astrology. Is there anything you want to remind us, or also to know about astrology and where it's going?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is that knowing about astrology is useless unless you do something in your own personal life with it. And it's this part. It's the act locally, and act locally can be as simple as dealing with your own shadow shit that we all have. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that. I mean, again, this is my hyper-functional Gemini ascendant. I have this image out there of people who don't know me, but know me from my, ascendant. I have just as much shit and shadow stuff as anyone, and it's not always easy to work at. But that's where Jung, in his last book he wrote before he died, I think in 1955 or 56, he wrote a book called The Undiscovered Self, a thin little book, maybe 120 pages. And in it, he said that world peace will never come from politicians running around the world and people signing treaties. World peace will only come when the people living in the world find peace within themselves. That basically war comes from a projection of unresolved shit. And of course, we are at a place right now where there's a lot of people who are holding on to denials of things that are very important and making their projections, really complicated. I've quoted recently many times Jackson Browne, who's one of my go-to lyricists. I don't know if you know the work of Jackson Browne, but he wrote a song in the early 70s called Before the Deluge. And in it, one of the verses, it's a longer song and it's worth listening to. You can find it on YouTube with lyrics. But one of the verses goes, Some of them were angry at the way the earth was abused by the men who learned how to forge her beauty into power. And they struggled to protect her from them, only to be confused by the magnitude of the fury in the final hour.
Mm.
There's a lot of people hold that, huh?
That's a song, right?
That's one verse from a song called Before the Deluge. And the concept is basically, who will be alive after the deluge? Basically, it's the idea that people went back to nature and people did this, but there's stuff going on. And the chorus of it, is basically about, let the music, drift up to the sky, let the music keep our spirits high, let the buildings keep our children dry, let things be revealed as they are, but it's a very powerful song. But this idea that we are at a point right now where we will not be able to go back to, and that, like things in our personal lives, there are things that happened at some point in our lives that created events where we went that way, and we can never go back to that point to go that way. We can make other corrections, but they never can redo or undo what's been done. And we're at one of those points right now that really, on a larger evolutionary scheme, really goes from, I think, really the mid 60s all the way up to the 2030s. That where humanity and or life on Gaia, life on planet Earth, will never be able to redo or undo what we've done in this period of time. And on a closer to home, meaning closer to now, I would say that 2024, 25, 26 is its own turning point for a lot of reasons that I'm sure you and every other astrologer who you've interviewed has talked about. And I'd be happy to come back and talk about them sometime in the future specifically. But obviously, there are things going on right now that, in my mind, it's almost like taking two metals like copper, which is beautiful and pliable, but not very useful because, unless it's for art or beauty, because it doesn't hold its shape, it's malleable. And let's say tin, which is brittle but bendable, but when you mix copper and tin and you melt them together, when they solidify, they make bronze. And bronze is strong and lasts and is not undone, whereas copper can be reshaped and remelted and so on. And I think that culturally, we've been at a point now for about a year or so where we've been copper and tin, and the two have been melting together, and they're beginning to solidify. And based upon what we do right now or don't do, and when I say do, it's where we create allegiances, who we support in our lives, both personally, emotionally, spiritually, and politically, how we spend our money, what politicians that represent us in whatever governments we live in, and what we say to them and how we communicate with them, whether it be by phone or by email or whatever. It's what some people are out on the streets doing what they would do. Other people are supporting them. Other people are quietly doing research or doing podcasts or whatever, but we all have things to do. And if we don't do it now, in a year or two, it's going to be too late. And that's the important thing to understand.
Wow, thanks for that. And guys, I'm going to leave the song below.
And that's think cosmically, act locally.
Exactly. And
even when Mercury is retrograde.
Now I understand the phrase better because you explain it now in this interview. Because before I used to think I had a different conception of the quote. But now
I'll tell you what act locally means. Act locally means hold the door open for someone who has two bags carrying out of a store. That's acting locally.
Right.
It's someone drops something. Pick the fucking thing up and say, here, you dropped this. I mean, it's the littlest things, but it also has to do with living with integrity. It has to do, and I would be the first to admit that for me, sometimes in my life that has been and sometimes is a struggle. I work at it, and it's something that if we're not acting locally, why bother faking all this other cosmic bullshit?
Exactly. That's what I got from you with the quote, because it's like think cosmically, but bring it to your day-to-day body, whatever is playing.
I
Because,
remember, do you know the writer Carolyn Mace? You know who that is? She wrote a number of books. She was a medical intuitive, brilliant lady, brilliant writer.
Mhm.
And I saw her talk once a few years ago, and she looked at the audience and she said, "You have no right being out in the cosmos until you take care of your own stuff."
There you go. Exactly. I mean, we're all crazy looking for astrology and answers in our charts and stuff. But as you said before, it's not going to be useful unless we start with ourselves, like, the person in front of the mirror. No. So,
Right.
Rick, thank
And
you
and
so
the, and
much.
the
Yeah.
person, and not only the person in front of the mirror, obviously, but also the person that is at the desk next to us at work, or the client that we're seeing, or our spouse, or our parents, or our children, or
Yeah.
our siblings, or anyone else. The waiter or the waitress. I mean, here's the thing that is like, how do you interact with people who can't do any good for you in your life beyond that moment? And it's that is often the most telling, when you see people who are rude, or unconscious.
Right.
I mean, I'm not perfect here, but I'm the person that, when I see the postman delivering letters, I'll go, "Hey, thanks." Obviously, it's there's a limit to what we do or what we say, but we never know how a simple interaction might then become viral for that person, that may turn around and say something to someone else that might make someone else's day and save someone's life. We don't even know.
Exactly. We always have the power to make a difference. I think it's just that we forget it. Rick, lastly, it just came to me just one question about the collective consciousness, because you were talking about it and how we are in times where, there are certain groups of people or whatever, trying to kind of like manipulate this thing. But do you think that us, the majority, if we change, or like, how can I explain? If we change our consciousness as a collective, and we stop being afraid, and we stop being lazy and blaming mom, dad, the government, the doctor, whoever it is, do you think we can really make a difference? Because some people, I see them, especially here, kind of like giving up, in the sense that we try, but like,
Well, that's what they want us to do.
mhm, mhm.
I mean, the whole politics of authoritarianism, of fascism, of competitive patriarchal dominance, colonialism, all the words that we all know, all of that is based upon a Roman concept of divide and conquer. It's all based upon, get people to fight against each other instead of who's in charge, and get people to basically feel like it doesn't matter what they do. So why bother doing anything? Just live out your life quietly and then go back to sleep. There's a wonderful Rumi poem, about the world waking up the morning. And it's really a metaphor. You hear people coming and going. Do not go back to sleep. Blah, 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 blah. This noise and that noise. Do not go back to sleep. And that's really, I mean, whoever the hell they are, not
Mhm.
you, not me, not anyone who's here listening to this, allegedly, but they want us to go back to sleep. And part of what they do is they create disillusionment, which often can lead to discouragement. And remember, disillusionment is not a bad thing. Illusion is Neptune. Illusions are not untrue. They're just not yet manifest. A dream is a wish your heart makes. And so when we have an illusion, when we follow that illusion and apply Saturn to it, Saturn takes Neptune's dreams and not always, but it can make them real. We become disillusioned when the dream is not real. And it's okay to see that a dream is not real, that the world we're living in, when we gauge it against what the ideal situation is, it's not okay. It's okay to be disillusioned. But it's not okay to let that disillusionment lead to discouragement, because courage, coming from the Latin cur, from French, the heart, we can be disillusioned, but if we lose heart, then we're in trouble.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. And guys, I'm gonna leave the song below so we can end this video and this interview in a higher note and with a beautiful song by Jackson Browne. I'm gonna leave it below if you want to hear it or just read the lyrics to get some inspiration. Rick, thank you so much for your time, for sharing everything, all of this with us. I hope to have you back here to keep talking about your chart, you know, or anything else, these interesting times we're living. And I have no words. Thank you so much for being here. I don't know if there's something you want to remind the audience before we go.
Just thank you for doing what you're doing. If anyone's interested in studying with me, they can find ways on Patreon, patreon.com/Rick Levine. And beyond that, have fun, think cosmically, act locally.
Thank you so much. I will leave his details below for those who want to study with him. I obviously recommend Rick because he was my first teacher and still learning from him. So I will leave the details below. Thank you for being with us and see you in the next episode. Can I ask you, oh my God, if you can do a backup of the recording, do you know how to do that or not? If not, don't worry.
Well, no, I know. Hold on.
Allowed to record on the computer. Yes, I think I gave you permission. Yeah.
And it appears, let me just make sure, pause, stop recording. Yep, I am recording, and I'm recording on my computer, so I can pop that up to a Google Drive if you need or something.
Yeah, just in case. You know what? Because you never know.